Hello, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing the Canterbury Tales Book Tag, which was created by A.J. Dunn Reads and Writes, and I was tagged by Tom L.A. Books, I believe, in March. And I would like to mention I do own many of the books, which I will be discussing, but they're unfortunately in storage 900 miles away. As I've mentioned in many previous videos, my brother just isn't doing the right thing and shipping my belongings down to me, but hopefully I will have some friends who will, help me and finally get these things back in my possession where they've belonged all along. So let's just get down with it. Number 1. The host is the character who relates the tales to the reader. He is large, loud, and merry. Recommend a mammoth book, over 800 pages, for March of the Mammoths. I would recommend Forever Amber by Kathleen Winsor. It was published in 1944, and the edition I have was published in 1945, so it's like a very, very early version of the book. It has a green hardcover, and the text is in 2 columns on each page, which I presume was because of wartime paper shortages and rationing, and it's frequently compared to Gone with the Wind because it has, the same kind of great, intense love story, and Amber only loves Bruce from the time she's 16 years old, but she unfortunately, they break up a number of times over the book, and she gets together with a number of other men, marrying some of them, and like Bruce also gets together with a number of other women, and Amber has children with many of the men, and just so many interesting, intense, dramatic adventures along the way, like, for example, the Great Fire of London and an outbreak of the bubonic plague, but always Bruce is the only man on Amber's mind. No matter what, is happening to her, she's always focused on the single goal. I've got to get back with Bruce, even though she doesn't, realize until the very end, look, this is the only man for me. I've got to do whatever it takes, even if it means, follow him across the ocean to America to, convince him once and for all, like, we need to get back together permanently. And I really would highly recommend this book, and she also has a remarkable life trajectory. She goes from a bastardess to like the mistress of the King of England, and it's just, a wonderful, wonderful book. I can't recommend it highly enough. Now, number 2. The Knight stands for fighting, war, and bravery. Recommend a book with a courageous main character. Now, I thought of Gone with the Wind. My original paperback I read is in storage, but I did get a wonderful, fairly early 1936, not the first edition, but obviously within the first year of production, hardcover at a local used bookstore. This is just incredible. I can't wait to finally reread this book, and I'm thinking of using it as my plane read when I make Aliyah move to Israel, which hopefully will be by the end of this year, and this is a much more comfortable trim size for me. I do have a future video planned about, what you should look for in both as a writer and a reader, like, formatting a book or what's most comfortable to read, different trim sizes and margin sizes and such, so it's going to be more comfortable on my eyes. But anyway, everyone pretty much knows the story. Even if they haven't read the book, they've probably seen the film. Scarlett goes through all these like difficult, incredibly like tough things throughout her life, but she always emerges triumphant and like resolves to, I'm going to do this no matter what. I'm going to help my family, help myself, help to keep my, ancestral home. And I do realize there are some, like genuinely like inexcusable racist things in the book. Like, for example, it cheerleads for the Klan, and there are some, creepy age difference relationships, which are like extremely unusual even for the era, and they uses the N-word many times, not just in the dialogue, but also in the actual narrative. And obviously I'm not going to excuse any of that, but you need to look beyond to what the big picture is. It's about this woman who triumphs over these incredible odds, and it's just an incredible love story. So obviously you just, focus on what the main thing actually is, and like realize, oh, these are some things that haven't aged well, to say the least, but that's not the main thing about the book. Just focus on the actual story and, Scarlett's incredible like character arc. I think you'll really, really enjoy this book, and it's one of the best like film to book to screen adaptations I've ever seen. They obviously, changed some things, left some things out, but, it generally feels very true to the book because Margaret Mitchell had a lot of creative control. Number 3. The Wife of Bath stands for marriage, sex, and arguing. Tell us about a book with a strong female character. Now, I thought of Anne of Green Gables, and I did mention in a previous haul video I got some original, not original, but like older, like hardcovers of Anne of Green Gables at the local used bookstore, and also Anne of Avonlea, the sequel, or like the first sequel. It's a long series, my like 10, 12 books or something like that. I believe, and pretty much everyone knows the story of Anne. She goes from, an unwanted orphan to like triumphing again over these like wonderful odds. She gets a good education. She like goes away to college, and she, becomes a teacher, has a family with a guy she loves, and they have a wonderful life together. Just so many adventures throughout the book, and I really, really did not like the garbage on Netflix, Anne with an E. It just tried to give it a 21st century makeover that just wasn't necessary and invented a lot of things that never even happened in the book. And I do think a lot of modern day people, they don't realize, I mean, I'm not saying they're deliberately ignorant or anything like that. They just don't know this. But, many older books, like the characters, particularly the women, they're, like ahead of their time, like proto-feminists, like strong and powered just by living their lives and doing things a little bit different. Like, for example, Anne is like a proto-feminist or an early, like, first wave feminist by, getting an education and feeling education is important and marrying a man she loves of her own choosing. That's the way people or women were like ahead of their time in that age. It wasn't all like, Anne with an E, like, oh, sticking it to the man at every turn. And here's some anachronistic 21st century values and vocabulary no one would have been using in real life. So, I really do highly urge you to like read this book and like look at older books with not with modern eyes, but just try to put them in their historical context and intent. See, oh wow, this character really was ahead of his or her time, and the author did it wonderfully well without, trying to be anachronistic or just, pushing boundaries just for their own sake. And number 4, The Partner is all about ambiguity. Tell us about your favorite gay and lesbian characters. Now, I chose 3 novels for this prompt. They're all lesbian novels. Annie on My Mind by Nancy Garden, The Well of Loneliness by Radcliffe Hall, and Diana, A Strange Autobiography by Frances V. Rummel, writing as Diana Fredrickson. Annie on My Mind is an absolute classic. It's an older YA novel, I believe, 1982 it was written, but it's not tied to the era it was written. There are no topical references, so it could basically be set in any era, and I think that's one of the things that has, helped to make it age very well. And it's, a classic coming out story. And it was a really, really pioneering and groundbreaking it because it was like one of the first lesbian stories that ended with a happy ending for the couple instead of, death, destruction, or marriage to a man like unfortunately many lesbian novels had up to that point. The Well of Loneliness by Radcliffe Hall is an absolute classic of lesbian literature. It was published in 1928, but for obvious reasons it was banned in many states and a number of countries. And something else to be noted about it, it does promote a theory which has long since been debunked called sexual inversion, and it basically proposed that gay men and lesbians were so-called sexual inverts, so they appeared physically male or female, but on the inside they were really the opposite anatomical sex, and that explained why they were like attracted to their same sex. And the main character, Stephen, is like a super butch lesbian, and it's explained, oh, her father really wanted a boy and raised her very much like a boy. Oh no, that's why she's really a lesbian. But unfortunately, but also because of the era, there's not really a happy ending, but you kind of could have expected that because that just wasn't really a thing in lesbian or gay male literature of the time. In the 3rd book, Diana, A Strange Autobiography, I've not read this yet, but I've heard many good things about it. I believe this was published in the late 1940s, very early 1950s, and it was very groundbreaking, like Annie on My Mind, in that it actually had a happy ending for the couple, and it did not end with like death, disgrace, like ruin, or marriage to a man. So I'm really, really looking forward to reading that book. Hopefully I can find it in the library or bookstore soon. Number 5. The Miller is bold, blasphemous, and overturns conventions. Who is your favorite naughty character? Now, I could think of many of the characters in Thérèse Philosophe, which was probably written by Jean-Baptiste de Boyer, Marquis d'Argens. There was a generous excerpt provided in the Forbidden Bestsellers of Pre-Revolutionary France, which was written by Robert N. Darnton, and that is a book which thankfully is back in my physical possession. Again, it was shipped down with my irreplaceable notebooks. My brother also included some books in that shipment as well, so hopefully I will get to read it again very soon, and I do believe it has a full English translation. Now, there's an excerpt about 50 pages or so in that book, but it's like more than enough to give a really good taste of the book, and it made me want to read the entire thing. And as I mentioned, one of the Easter eggs in my own books, probably like all of my books I've written since reading Thérèse Philosophe, is a phrase like similar to like name agonized long and hard over the richness of the choice, or overwhelmed by the richness of the choice. One of my favorite characters in the book is Monsieur l'Abbé T. He's a radical priest who would probably get excommunicated if people knew the kinds of things he was saying, like, for example, God would only have to destroy the devil and we would all be saved. There must be a lot of injustice or weakness on his part, and thus, God, with his foreknowledge, in creating us, knew in advance that we'd be eternally damned and eternally miserable. So, it's just a very, very blasphemous, unconventional character. But when you really think about it, he's not really saying this to attack the church or religion or having doubts. He's just, saying this to get people thinking about what they actually believe and maybe do some like reforms within reason. But you obviously have to read the book to see it in its full context and intent. And it's classified as philosophical pornography by Robert and Darton. I personally would consider it like more of erotica because there's an actual plot line and people aren't constantly going at it. But I do really highly recommend this book. It's like very funny and very thought-provoking. Number 6. The Prioress is modest, quiet, and compassionate. Recommend a book you don't hear much about on BookTube. Now, I've only been making BookTube content since September 2021, so I don't know if people have been talking about this. I thought of The Persian Letters by Montesquieu, a classic of French Enlightenment literature, which we had to read when I took a class on history of the Enlightenment at UMass. I was a history major. He didn't assign us every letter in the whole book, but I did read a few extra, and then like a few years later, I read the entire book. I really, really love this book, and this, again, thankfully, is a book that has come back into my physical possession because it was one of the books which my brother sent down to me. It's about these two guys from Persia who like travel to Western Europe to like just soak in the Enlightenment and learn about different things, and they are exchanging letters with their friends. Some of them are traveling elsewhere across Europe, and they're keeping up with the eunuchs and the wives back in the Seraglio, the harem in Persia. There's from Isfahan, Persia, which was the capital of Persia at one point in history. There's just, a lot of really, really interesting things like politics, philosophy, like the personal drama going on back at home, and we just learn a lot about the different mindsets, the East versus West, for example. Now, there are some things about the book which haven't aged so well. Like, for example, there's one letter talking about how Russian wives supposedly love to be beaten, and this desperate young wife is furious and devastated. Her husband never beats her, no matter how hard she tries to make him angry at her. And like, apparently, the harder and more a husband beats his wife, the more he loves her. That's just absolutely like disgusting. I can't believe anyone would ever have believed that, or even like thought that was something funny to be laughed at. One of my favorite letters is letter 24. Everyone else in my class really loved this letter too. It's talking about how great a magician King Louis XIV is, but there's an even greater magician than he is, and it talks about the things the magician can make the king believe. This magician is called the Pope, and like everyone was laughing at that line. That's just like really one of the funniest parts of the entire book. Number 7. The monk cares little for the rule of work and prayer. Tell us about an unconventional character. Now, I thought of Max Damian from Hermann Hesse's breakthrough novel, Damian, which was published in 1919. I have seen several people discussing it recently on BookTube, and I'm hoping in August to have like a special Hermann Hesse-themed month because August 2022 will be his 60th yahrzeit death anniversary. Damian opened my mind to so many deep, fascinating things. Foremost among his teachings, which influenced me, was his fascinating, thought-provoking alternative interpretation of the Mark of Cain. In Damian's view, there's more than meets the eye to the biblical story. People stayed away from Cain not because he had some mark on him, but rather because of what the mark represented. The Mark of Cain is the mark of someone who's different from the crowd, not afraid to be different, a nonconformist, someone who questions the status quo. Abel was a little wuss who never questioned anything, and that pissed Cain off. I am very proud to bear the Mark of Cain myself, and obviously we're not like excusing murder or anything like that. Obviously, Cain manifested his nonconformity in the wrong way at that moment, but just, overall what that story represented, he was, standing against the crowd, and Abel was the one who never questioned anything and just like happily went along with like what was expected of him. Damian also introduced me to the concept of Abraxas, a deity who's half God, half devil. Both good and evil exist inside each of us, so why shouldn't it be the same for a deity? And obviously that's not part of like Jewish tradition or most other like mainstream like current religions, but it's just what it represents, not in saying you necessarily like believe that literally. If it weren't for the evil inclination, we'd never do some important things. And there's a famous Jewish teaching that says, if not for the evil inclination, the Yetzer Hara, we would never have children, like take a spouse or build a house. So obviously you have to channel it in the correct way, but not, pretend it doesn't exist. Number 8, the friar is all about confession. Confess to us. Have you read the Bible, Torah, Quran, or other religious texts all the way through? Now, if you saw either of the two videos I did about the religious Jewish books currently in my possession, you saw me discussing my Tanakh, my Jewish Bible, which I got as a present when I joined my first Jewish congregation when I was 18 years old, about to turn 19. I wrote my name in the front and the date I got it, although it's kind of sad. It has all these like spaces for writing and births and like weddings and death and stuff. And unfortunately, I never found a husband or had any children, so that's all blank. But God willing, I will finally merit a husband and have some children before time runs out. And I have never read this all the way through, but obviously I've never read the Torah all the way through because you listen to it being read when you go to shul, to synagogue, and you also study it on your own and with groups throughout the year. But I mean, I really would like to obviously read it from cover to cover. At some point I have read portions of the Bible, throughout my life, but I don't really believe I've read the adult Bible from cover to cover, which is, I know, very surprising to say, although I did read my aunt's Kitty Bible, which was a Christian Bible when I was a preteen. I was reading the Quran in autumn 2002, shortly after I graduated UMass, but I really was uncomfortable with the anti-Semitic comments, which are like very, very frequent, not just, like occasional or offhanded from the author. So, I had to DNF it, but I am really looking forward to reading this from cover to cover someday. And just an FYI, I'm absolutely not telling people how to talk or how to stop speaking or like saying they're wrong for speaking the way they're taught to. I'm just saying, like, Jewish people do not use the terms Old and New Testament. We just call our Bible the Tanakh, which stands for Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim, Torah, prophets, writings. And if we're referring to the Christian Bible, we'll just say, the Christian Bible, or the specific part, like the Gospels or the epistles or whatever. And so anyway, number 9. The summoner is lecherous and a drunk who tries to sound more educated than he is. Tell us about a book that sounded better than it was. Now, obviously, there are many, many, many books I could have chosen for this one, but I chose to discuss The Invisible Bridge by Julie Oranger. Hopefully, I'm mispronouncing her name correctly. This was pitched as a sweeping saga about 3 brothers from Hungary on the eve of World War II, and then the war starts when the book gets further and further on. But it was really just the insipid soap opera-esque love story of one of the brothers, and it was just really, really horribly written. I have a full post I did on my blog, and maybe I'll turn that into a video at some point. It's just such garbage. Like, for example, she liberally sprinkles it with million-dollar thesaurus words, and she shows off her research. Like, Andras, the main character, is this perfect, idealized man. It's like a classic example of a woman writing a man. Just we laugh about men writing women, not how they really are, just some ridiculous idealized version of them. The book was just so absolutely boring. It was just way more telling than showing this happened, then that happened, these things happened, then those things happened, name said this, name did that, over the summer these things happened, then these things happened during the winter, flashback with even more telling, info dumpy, as you know, Bob, dialogue. And it was just, the whole book was horrible. Almost nothing was good about this book. It was just one of the worst books I can remember reading over the last few years. And it's also totally unrealistic. 22-year-old man who's a university freshman, he obviously started much later than usual, falls in love with a woman 9 years older than he is, who has a child from a previous relationship, and he's begging her to get married and have babies together. That's just completely unrealistic, and apparently it's strongly based on her grandparents' own love story, but it just doesn't come across like anything realistic. I just really, really hated this book. And apparently her second novel, which was about the American diplomat Varian Fry, who saved thousands of Jews during the show, is just as bad. It's just for so many reasons, but many of them are the same reasons. Number 10, the parson is poor, but rich in thought and deeds. Tell us about a book that gave you more than you expected. Now, I decided to, Out of This Furnace by Thomas Bell. I was supposed to read this book when I was doing a research paper in my 8th grade history class about a branch of our family tree, like the ethnic origins and, what they went through immigrating to America and such like that. But, I didn't really read much of this book, but I did still get an A++ on my research paper about Slovak immigrants, and I went back and read the book when I was maybe, I think, 24, 25, and it really, really emotionally touched me. I was, close to tears or getting misty eyes at a certain point, thinking of, this is what my ancestors went through. They were horribly exploited by these, people running the coal mines, not permitted to, shop in other towns or do a lot of things. They were just, treated so horribly and, kept in poverty. They weren't even working class. They were just, poor, exploited coal mine workers, and they went through so many struggles to get their children eventually several generations later out of this furnace. And I'm so glad my own Slovak ancestors in that branch of the family tree made these sacrifices, so I would not have to grow up in a capitalist run company town and able to do a lot of things. And no one ever chased me home from school and attacked me and called me a dumb hunky like they did to my grandpap, just, horrible things many people aren't aware of, because I know many people don't know too much about Slovak history or Slovak American history, but I really would recommend this book. This is a very, very emotional read for me. Number 11. The Squire stands for youth, beauty, and courting. What book did you fall in love with when you were a youth? I thought of several ones for this. As I mentioned previously, Damien by Hermann Hesse, which I discovered when I was 14. Judy Delton's Kitty series, which I'll be discussing in more depth in a later question. But it's a really, really cute, fun book about a Catholic girl coming of age in St. Paul, Minnesota during the 1940s, and her two very opposite best friends. I've loved this book since I was a preteen, and it held up really well when I revisited as an adult. And one book I fell in love with as a preteen, but it did not hold up for an adult reading for me, was Constance, A Diary of Early Plymouth by Patricia Clapp. I read this book over and over again when I was about 11 through 14 years old, but when I revisited it, I think I was in my late 30s. I couldn't believe, I had liked this book so much for so many years. It was just not badly written necessarily. It's just a lot of things that you don't do in modern books anymore. Like, for example, info dumpy, as you know, Bob dialogue, and Constance acts like a silly 20th century flirt instead of an actual pilgrim girl from the 17th century. And there's their broken engagement near the end, and not really a big deal at all. Wouldn't that have been a huge scandal in her? Oh, she just wants to marry someone else. That's cool. No insult at all, or any scandal like that. It's just so many things I really didn't like about this book when I revisited it as an adult, but I did love this book when I was younger. Number 12. The Clerk says little, but his words are wise and morally virtuous. Tell us about a short book that made you a better person. I had to think about this and even look at my pictures I took of my bookshelf before 99% of my books went into storage, and I came up with What Would Buddha Do by Franz Metcalf. And it's just little questions about modern day dilemmas and moral questions and quandaries. Now, this is a really fun, cute book. It's obviously not meant to be some heavy-hitting spiritual tome, just, little questions for example, what would Buddha about dieting, a friend using drugs, depression, if someone hates him, if a friend lets him down, lying, Buddha is faced with a crisis, road rage, facing criticism, personal failure, romance, things like that. And then answers are provided from quotes in Buddhist scripture and some things Buddha himself said. I would highly recommend this book. It's really, really fun, quick, easy to read, particularly if you love Buddhism. Buddhism is one of the religions which I've long felt closest to after my own. Number 13. The Man of Law upholds justice and knows the laws by heart. What is a book you could not imagine rereading? Now, I didn't have to think hard about this question at all. Anything by Beatrice Sparks. She was an absolutely vile fraud and very dangerous. She was the author of all these books. She claimed she was merely the editor or discoverer of. Her most famous fraud is Go Ask Alice, which I haven't read yet, and probably her next most famous is Jay's Journal. 25 of the entries in this book actually were written by the young man who unfortunately took his own life, but all the rest were made up by Sparks to just push a bizarre satanic theme and her own weird obsessions and pet crusades, just horrible things. What she did to the real life family of this young man was just beyond excusing. It just, I can make a video more about that in detail. I really, really hate this woman, and her books are absolute garbage. They don't talk like any real teen does, and you can tell they're all her books too, because they all have the exact same writing style. It's just trying to write a whodunit and making it so obvious who did it from the very first page. I really, really hate Beatrice Sparks. Number 14. The Manciple provides the food. Recommend a series you think is good from the first book to the last. Now, this is what I mentioned a few questions ago. Judy Delton's Kitty series originally only had 3 books in it. Kitty in the Middle, Kitty in the Summer, and Kitty in High School, and she later went back and wrote a prequel, Kitty from the Start. Unfortunately, they all appear to be out of print now, which is a shame because they're just such wonderful, wonderful books. They held up for me so well when I revisited them as an adult, and they really strongly influenced my own writing as well. There are many things and books I was writing at the same time, or at least drafts of them, that were inspired by things Kitty and her friends did. They're really, really funny and cute, great historical fiction, great books if you're interested in what a pre-Vatican II Catholic was like. And Kitty has 2 very opposite best friends, rebellious Eileen and super duper religious Margaret Mary. And then she eventually gets some new friends in high school and realizes the beauty of tried and true friendships, just really funny, cute things that girls do. For example, Eileen is so rebellious and unorthodox. She makes a game of going to confession. They do a little confessional in her closet in her bedroom, and they make up sins they've committed, while Margaret Mary wears a scapular and goes to daily mass. And there's just so many like wonderful, like fun, cute things about this book. I really, really enjoyed this series. Number 15. The merchant deals in furs and cloth and is powerful and wealthy. Recommend a book with a powerful message or theme. Now, I've mentioned this book in many previous videos, and I do have a whole video reviewing this, as well as a blog post I wrote about it. Dara Horn, People Love Dead Jews, and that is an intentionally provocative title, and she proves her point throughout the book. People, know a lot about how we were murdered during the Shoah and pogroms and the Inquisition, and like sometimes like Jewish heritage sites and towns and cities where we used to have large, vibrant communities, but we're not there anymore. But of course, these exhibits conveniently leave out just why we no longer live there. And so basically, like a lot of Gentiles know far more about how we died than how we actually live, both in the present and in the past. Our vibrant, wonderful culture and like religion and theology, and the fact that we're an ethno-religious group. We're not just a religion or just, an ethnic group. We're just like so much more than that. A lot of people don't really understand that concept in the modern era. They just, are able to think about, modern day conceptions of peoplehood. But I really, really highly recommend this book. These are wonderful, wonderful essays to read. And she does like rightly point out in the beginning, many people have been, quoting this. More people can name 3 death camps than they can name 3 Yiddish writers or 3 Hebrew writers or writers of any other Jewish language. And we really, really need to change that and help people to learn more about Jewish culture, and not just the suffering part, just, the wonderful, active, vibrant part of it. And if I ever do have enough clout on BookTube, I would love to do a readathon in May, which is Jewish American Heritage Month. Number 16. The shipman is a wine-stealing rascal. Tell us about a side character who steals the spotlight. Now, I immediately thought of Behemoth and The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Ivanovich Bulgakov. He's this black cat who goes around, shooting a Browning and just like causing all sorts of trouble. And he wears a monocle. And like, there's one funny line in the book. There's this, disturbance in the apartment or nearby, and like someone's like wondering what it is, and this other character says, "It's Behemoth, of course. Damn him." And I would love to name a black cat Behemoth. He was just like such a great character. A lot of books don't really have animal characters if they're in for adults, so this is a really, really good example of one. Number 17. The physician knows what ails you and can cure it. Tell us about a book which you consider a comfort read. Now, I've mentioned this book in several of my previous videos and do have a whole video about it. This is The Dowdy Chong by Lao Tzu, and this is a classic translation by Gia Fu Feng and Jane English from the 1972, and there are just so many wonderful like black and white pictures in it, and the original Chinese. This is one of many reasons I love it. I'm very emotionally attached to this book because it's been with me through so many, tough, difficult times, and I've read several of the like chapters, and it just speaks so powerfully across the ages. And let's just see, I do have like original like bookmarks throughout the book, which I've put in there over the years, and just like, you don't have to be a Taoist to read this book. This is wonderful, like universal wisdom, which is applicable to many, many people. This is a fairly short chapter with some lines which I have used in several of my own books over the years, and just, really a big influence for me. Number 76. A man is born gentle and weak. At his death he is hard and stiff. Green plants are tender and filled with sap. At their death they are withered and dry. Therefore the stiff and unbending is the disciple of death. The gentle and yielding is the disciple of life. Thus an army without flexibility never wins a battle. A tree that is unbending is easily broken. The hard and strong will fall. The soft and weak will overcome. This is the final chapter, 81, which has some really beautiful lines in it as well, just basically summing up the whole of Lao Tzu's teachings. Truthful words are not beautiful. Beautiful words are not truthful. Good men do not argue. Those who argue are not good. Those who know are not learned. The learned do not know. The sage never tries to store things up. The more he does for others, the more he has. The more he gives to others, the greater his abundance. The Tao of heaven is pointed, but does no harm. The Tao of the sage is work without effort. Number 18. The Franklin is not a vassal or a noble, but a free man. Recommend a book about freedom in any form. I thought about My Bridges of Hope by Livia Baton Jackson, which she wrote about her life in the years immediately after the Shoah. She was lucky enough to survive with her mother, and her brother also survived, and they went home to Slovakia, which was occupied by Hungary during the war, and instead of immediately immigrating or going to a DP camp. And I really appreciate this book because too many Shoah memoirs, they just stop soon after the war, or maybe they'll have like a brief epilogue or final chapter looking back many years in the future. But this is like a really, really good book, which I would recommend. Number 19. The Reeve is believable on the outside, but lies on the inside. What book was different than what the blurb led you to believe? I do have a previous video on this. Not Our Kind by Kitty Zellis. It was just absolutely horrible. It purported to be some serious book about like facing anti-Semitism in the early post-war era in New York City, but it was just like some stupid soap opera about the main character and the much older Gentile brother of her employer. It was just really, really not a good book and all. I didn't really believe the so-called conflict because Eleanor, the protagonist, she really was not like religious at all. I obviously know like just being Jewish by birth is all it takes for some people, but it made it sound like she was actually facing more than just, like vague social like exclusion or things like that. Just, I really would not recommend this book. Number 20. The Plowman is good-hearted and faithful. What book do you read over and over again? Fragments of Isabella, Saving the Fragments, and Isabella, From Auschwitz to Freedom, where the lattermost book is a combination of the first two with some new pieces and some like very interesting edits, like taking out some lines that were very like powerful and strong in the original. This is the memoirs of Isabella Leitner. Her original last name was Kotz. She was from Kisvárda, Hungary, and she survived with some of her sisters, and their only brother also survived. They later came to America to join their father, who was already there. This is just one of the most influential books in my life. It's influenced many of the things I've written as well. In the Death March Escape, at the beginning of one of my hiatus works in progress, The Strongest Branches of Uprooted Trees, is very strongly based on the Death March Escape Isabella and her sisters had as well. So it's just, that's a really, really wonderful, like powerful, like memorable, moving book I would highly recommend to anybody. Number 21. The Guildsmen are 5 men who act as a unit and stand for brotherhood or sisterhood. Recommend a book with a strong ensemble cast of characters. Exodus by Leon Uris, and I do not recommend the film which was based on it. It left so many things out, and it totally transformed two of the characters. Dove, who is like this blonde weakling in the book, he's suddenly transformed into some tall, strong, dark stud. And Karen, who's a serious brunette, suddenly she's some vapid, platinum blonde bimbo who says like insipid lines like, "Ooh, Dove, you have such a beautiful name. Sometimes I whisper it to myself at night." Like, that is not who she is in the book at all. And like, Dove is completely written differently in the book too, and they leave out all of the like backstory chapters about the main characters that really, really show you who they are by like exploring their like history and what made them like who they became in the present. So that's just like a really huge gap in the book. They end the book where they end the movie where it doesn't actually end in the book. It goes on for much, much longer. There's some really corny, sappy ending to the book, just like so many horrible things about it. But anyway, the book itself is really, really wonderful. If you're curious about, the early founding of the state of Israel and the people who like came back to our indigenous homeland after so many years, like Shoah survivors who came, despite the barbaric British blockade and like their ships being pirated and forced onto DP camps behind barbed wire on Cyprus. Just like a really, really emotional read. I first read it when I was 18, and then when I reread it when I was 24, I cried so many times during so many scenes and moments in this book. I obviously can't say what any of them are. They would be massive spoilers, but this is just a really, really wonderful, like, emotional read. I do highly recommend Leon Uris's books, although, he wasn't really what I consider a great writer. He's more of a great storyteller and, like, maybe somewhat above average writer who just had a really, really good editor. But anyway, I really would highly recommend just about any of his books, except I'm told his final book, A God in Ruins, kind of sucks, and a better title for it would be An Author in Ruins. Number 22. The Cook Makes the Food That Feeds You. Tell us about a book that feeds your soul. Now, I thought of The Play of God by Devi Von Amali. I've mentioned this in several previous videos and do have a whole video reviewing it. It's about the life of Krishna and the years leading up to his birth. It just really, really reawakened my interest in Hinduism, and it teaches you to view the divine as, so many different things, and like a really, really personal story. And there's so many wonderful adventures throughout this book. Many Westerners don't really know much about Hinduism. Number 23. The Yeoman Serves You. Tell us about a book that served its purpose, that did what you wanted it to do. It wasn't great, but it wasn't bad. Mary, Mrs. A. Lincoln by Janice Cook Newman, which is about Mary Todd Lincoln, the wife of President Abraham Lincoln. This book was all right, but it wasn't super stellar historical fiction. There are a lot of really weird things in the book. Like, for example, she makes Mary some sex-obsessed woman. She's even thinking about sex at her husband's deathbed. And meanwhile, she portrays frigid President Lincoln as totally frigid and a cold fish, and Robert Lincoln is portrayed as a cold-hearted, unfeeling villain almost from the moment of his birth, and just so many really crappy things about the book, like historical inaccuracies and just really weird things she's doing just to make it a more compelling story. Number 24. The Second Nun talks about a saint's life in her tale. What book do you praise often? Well, obviously you can tell from the books behind me, I do a lot of videos on the Divine Comedy and Dante and his life and world. I have a whole playlist called all about Dante and the Divine Comedy. If you've missed any of my videos in that series, you can always check it out. And I do have many more videos planned in future. That was the reason I began making content again, because I was planning to do a recitation of Canto 1 of Inferno in the original medieval Italian Florentine Tuscan, which I did successfully do on Dante's 700th death anniversary, and I still know all 136 lines by heart. I did them today while I was waiting for my sunscreen to dry at the pool. It takes about 7 minutes, so that's about how long it takes the sunscreen to dry. Number 25. The nun's priest is witty and doesn't take himself too seriously. Recommend a book that has a funny or witty main character. Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio has a lot of funny and witty characters and stories. It's hard to pick just one, and if I do get to 100 subscribers, I will be doing a 105 video series on this book. I just really can't wait to start researching and writing the posts I'll be doing for the videos. I know several of the stories practically by heart, and almost every book I've ever written since reading the Decameron has at least one Decameron reference to it, either explicitly referring to a story or character or a line that was inspired or taken from it. And one night at my writing group back home in Albany, New York, I told my friends the 10th story of the third day, which is the famously most raunchy, dirty story, and they were all we were all laughing a lot. They absolutely loved that story. And I'm number 26, Tags on Book 2, Pilgrims. I guess anyone who hasn't done this tag already is welcome to do it. So thank you very much for listening to the end. If you haven't subscribed already, please consider doing so. And I do love seeing comments from my viewers, and thank you for listening. See you again very soon. Bye.